Stokes, the great funeral procession sets off from Westminster Abbey. The mournful beat of the music. And the Queen's final progress through the heart of London, the city of her birth, gets underway. For this state funeral on a scale not seen in Britain for 70 years, since the funeral procession for King George VI in 1952. More than 3,000 military personnel taking part, along with representatives of civilian organisations.
Esse meliponário aqui. Não conheço esse meliponário.
The head of the procession, which is representatives of Commonwealth countries and the armed forces. parties leading the way along to Wellington Arch, flanked by mounted Metropolitan Police, followed by a contingent of those who've been recipients of the George Cross and Victoria Cross, and representatives of the armed forces of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other Commonwealth countries. Passing the gates of New Palace Yard and the Palace of Westminster and the Houses of Parliament, where of course Her Majesty attended on so many occasions, or the state opening of Parliament. And all of this happening under the steady gaze of Sir Winston Churchill, dominating this part of Parliament Square. Queen's first Prime Minister, the young Queen, who expressed her debt of gratitude to the older man for the guidance that he gave in those first few years of the reign.
Slowly, steadily, here approaching the cenotaph.
The National Memorial of Remembrance for all those who have died in war, the annual ceremony which Queen Elizabeth attended every year of her reign until the very last. The Major General commanding the Household Division passing the cenotaph now. And on the side of the road are the veterans' organisations led by the Royal British Legion. You can see on the right of the screen.
Which includes foliage chosen for its symbolism. The kings had a very big hand in this. Rosemary for remembrance. Myrtle, the ancient symbol of a happy marriage. And it was cut from a plant that was grown from a sprig of myrtle in the wedding bouquet of Princess Elizabeth to Prince Philip back in 1947. And English oak, which symbolises the strength of love. along Whitehall, where the Queen once described her joy when she mingled with the crowds on VE Day in 1945, and where throughout her years as sovereign, she led the nation in November on Remembrance Sunday, placing her wreath at the cenotaph and pausing to remember those lost in conflicts in the service of their country. Standards lowered by the Royal British Legion, King George's Fund for Sailors and Soldiers Charity, Royal Air Force Benevolent Fund, the Soldiers, Sailors and Air Force Association. Solemnity as Her Majesty's coffin is taken past the cenotaph, unveiled by her grandfather George V in 1920. Some sense of the building scale of this funeral procession. The head of the procession now away down the Mall towards Buckingham Palace. The procession itself is 1.25 miles long. Representatives here, the Royal Air Force, the Navy and the Army. Hundreds of representatives with arms reversed as a sign of mourning. Queen Consort, the Princess of Wales, George and Charlotte. One of the cars following this procession. What a majestic sight. The sun has come out, making the colours so vibrant. On the Mall, looking up to Admiralty Arch. The scene, of course, every year of the happy event of the birthday parade, the Queen's parade on the official birthday. Today it's an opportunity to escort Her Majesty one last time along the Mall and past the London Home of Government House. His Majesty the King leading the party of close family members. Naval ratings, gently turning towards the entrance to Horse Guards and the narrow archway which will lead onto the parade ground. The Royal Company of Archers, one of the groups of Royal Bodyguards.
Cortege passes beneath the arch at Horse Guards onto Horse Guards parade.
The main entrance to the estate, including
Bill
St James's Palace and
described seeing
Buckingham
as
Palace.
this part of the cortege.
The gun carriage through the arch into the formal palace area along the mile-long route lined by the armed forces here, the Gurkhas, towards the Guards Memorial to the right of the screen, and then wheeling right to the Mall, a journey that Queen Elizabeth has travelled many, many times, not just on her birthday parades, but also for state visits, greeting of foreign heads of state.
onto the familiar expanse of Horse Guards Parade, where for decades Her Majesty has attended the birthday parade in early June to mark her official birthday. For many, many years, of course, she would come on horseback. In later times, in a carriage, but devoted to the event itself and thoroughly enjoyed the music with an expert eye for detail. And she knew the parade, trooping the colour, better than anyone. Golden orb surmounted by a cross to symbolise Christianity over the world. The sceptre, the monarch's symbol of fairness and justice.
Position looking back towards Admiralty Arch along the Mall, a true sense of the scale
heading
of the procession
towards the Guards Memorial.
About 3,500 soldiers
gently
in
turning to
procession
the right,
and lining the route.
to the Mall.
Here the drum horses of the
And that final
Nassau
approach to
Cavalry,
Buckingham
senior
Palace.
animals in the army. And procession with 8 groups led by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who we saw earlier in scarlet, the bands of the Rifles and the Brigade of Gurkhas, the George Cross organisations, Commonwealth troops. We've seen Australians in the famous slouch hat and New Zealanders in the campaign hat. Civilian organisations, Commonwealth detachments, detachments of the regiments of which the Queen had a particular honorary position as the Major General commanding the Household Division, who's responsible for the military aspects of all of this week in London.
And circling around the Great Queen Victoria Memorial. The Royal Air Force there played such an important part, of course, in the events of the 8th of September and later, bringing the Queen back to London from Scotland. The Queen's body was accompanied by the Princess Royal. The Royal Air Force flew Her Majesty back to RAF Northolt. A sight that the late Queen would have been very touched by. That is one of the drum horses. Drums draped in black. This one is called Apollo, one of the latest additions to the Royal Mews and the State Trust. Major General commanding the Household Division, Major General Christopher Gicker, who's in charge of all the troops on parade today, thousands of them. colourful uniforms of those in the procession behind the Major General. The Sovereign's escort, Household Cavalry, the Blues and Royals. About the colourful uniforms, they are the pursuivants and the heralds and the kings of arms. They're in authority when it comes to heraldic matters. Saw them present at the Accession Council and at the State Opening of Parliament and other important events to do with the state and the crown.
Funeral march beat, consistent 75 paces per minute, the muffled bell of Westminster Abbey, the guns. To coordinate even the sounds of this procession is an art in itself.
Yes, there are two aspects to that. One is that the Royal Corps of Signals have signallers with the horologists at Big Ben, as well as with the gun and with the bell, and also the bands are playing this series of marches in a different order, so that as they pass a particular point, the public will get a different one each time. So a lot of thought has gone into how this sounds as well as how it looks. It's the band of the Coldstream Guards.
The scene at Buckingham Palace as this procession stretches now from Constitution Hill all the way back to Horse Guards. Representatives of the Army and the Royal Air Force and the Navy, the band of the Irish Guards and the Welsh Guards, this section of the parade. Funeral procession makes its way onto the Mall. Consort, pointing out some of the elements of the procession to Prince George and Princess Charlotte, and the Princess of Wales looking on. And the Countess of Essex. Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie. Just at the back of this section, behind the king, caught a glimpse there we are, of Duke of Sussex, Princess Royal, and her husband, Vice Admiral Timothy Lawrence, Duke of York, Gloucester, Peter Phillips. So many memories of those taking part in this procession from the royal family. And there we are, Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother, who died 20 years ago, and King George VI, who died a relatively young man in his 50s. Back in 1952, of course, meaning that the Queen came to the throne at the age of 25. And no question that King George VI was responsible for shaping this remarkable reign that we've seen over the past 70 years. Because Queen Elizabeth II has reigned very much within the parameters set for her by her father. A very close bond between them, as indeed there was between the Queen and her mother. Great rich mix of military heritage before our eyes. Royal Marines, armed forces from the Commonwealth countries, the Household Cavalry, and among this part of the procession too, the heads of the armed forces. Admiral Tony Radican,
Again, a sense of the scale of the procession.
head of all the armed forces.
This is the head of the
His hopes
procession.
of
He's
this
already just passed from
procession
shot. Bill, just give a sense
would be
of the geography
impeccable
for those who
and a
don't know
fitting
the layout
tribute to
here so well.
Her late
Yes, the
Majesty.
procession was going from
I
Westminster
don't think
Abbey and
anyone
is
would
going to
question that.
Wellington Arch on Hyde Park Corner. And this, with the memorial we can see on the left is the Commonwealth Gates, which is just on the edge of Hyde Park Corner. So this is one of the some of the leading elements of regiments which the Queen had a particular position in, just passing there. Bottom right we can see the Queen's watermen, and later on the barge master will have a very prominent position
and
in
Royals.
St George's Chapel.
Followed by
And
the drum
down the
horse.
side of the coffin we can see the
and the
closest
state
bodyguard
trumpeter.
there, the nearest guard, the gentleman at arms, with the bearer party in front
They
of
make
them
their
and the
way
yeoman at the
gradually
guard
towards Wellington Arch
behind them.
and Hyde
And these
Park
naval
Corner.
ratings drawn from across the Navy, led by HMS Collingwood, which is the Maritime Warfare Centre. So these are all active service
And
Royal
then we
Navy
have the
personnel.
Commonwealth
Was very important
Memorial
connection
Gates
with Queen Elizabeth, whose
with the
father,
flames.
husband and son
We see the
all saw active service
procession
with the Royal
making
Navy.
its way
And at the start, that's when she
towards this
first took notice of Prince Philip.
part
And
of
she was a Royal Navy
central
wife.
London, which is
in
near the
Malta.
gardens of Buckingham Palace, and what is normally a very busy section of Hyde Park Corner. Today it's solemn and silent with this funeral procession for the late Queen. The Honourable Artillery Company approaching, part of the great representation of the British Army in this procession. Flanking the Queen's coffin. On either side we have the bearer party from the Queen's Company, 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, and with the distinctive white plumes, the gentlemen at arms behind them, equally distinctive in their Tudor uniform, the yeomen of the guard. Field Marshal Duke of Norfolk, the man who's in charge of the organisation of state events, state funerals, coronations. It's a hereditary role. It's the 18th Duke of Norfolk, and he's the one who's shouldered a lot of the responsibility for making sure that this state funeral happens in accordance with Her late Majesty's wishes. And then in the centre, with the white plumes, we have the Major General commanding the Household Division, troops of the London District, Major General Christopher Giger, who's in command of all the troops in procession today and elsewhere, lining the route, taking part not just in the procession itself. The great funeral marches, so familiar of course, Mendelssohn and Beethoven and Chopin.
Front of the procession reaches Wellington Arch, key point in the processional that we will witness today.
Yes, indeed. This is where the coffin will be transferred from the Royal Navy gun carriage into the state hearse for its journey to Windsor for its service and committal in St George's Chapel.
It was first
This
reserved
part of London
for the
is
funeral of Queen
a
Victoria.
memorial place anyway. It has
More than a
the
century
Australian War Memorial, the New Zealand Memorial, the
That's
Heavy
been
Artillery
used since
Memorial,
then.
and will be the parade
It's
ground
the
for this
same
final parade of the London procession
state
as
gun carriage
each
used for the
contingent
funeral
that
of
comes up
King George
Constitution
VI.
Hill falls in, as you can see
70
here,
years ago.
on the north side of Wellington Arch, with Duke of Wellington's house behind them. And at the base of the arch you can see a party of Royal Navy
Regiments of foot
personnel. They are
guards.
the piping party, who will
They're
play
distinctive
crucial pipe
tunics.
calls to signal the moment
Irish,
of the
Scots,
transfer of the coffin.
Grenadiers, and the Coldstream Guards. Royal Lancers and the Royal Engineers also in the procession. And this is the scene at Wellington Arch, which stands right in the middle of Hyde Park Corner. The ancient home of the Duke of Wellington nearby, and Wellington Arch named because of that connection. At one stage, the arch was planned as the main entrance to Buckingham Palace, but as with Marble Arch, things were changed at a later date. And this is where we will have a gathering of thousands of members of the armed forces for this final part of the ceremony in London, where the Queen's coffin will be transferred from that gun carriage to the state hearse, which will be waiting to take the Queen home to Windsor. Prince of Wales standing tall, just behind his father the King, and a section of these young naval ratings. The Yeomen of the Guard.
As you can see, the
Important part of
cortege
this procession
here just about
for reasons of
to
tradition,
move
and then
in
the
front
Royal
and
Company of
past
Archers,
Buckingham Palace,
with
which
their magnificent eagle
is
feathers.
so indelibly linked in the minds of
The
millions
King's
of people
bodyguard in
the world
Scotland.
over with Queen Elizabeth II. Her office, often her home. We saw many of her staff in the front rows of Westminster Abbey. Others are there waiting to say their final farewell.
And the King's Guard, the permanent
Deeply
guard on Buckingham
poignant
Palace, found today
moment
by
in
the
this
Irish
procession.
Guards, turned out, paying a
As Her
royal
Majesty
salute
Queen Elizabeth
for the
II
last time as Queen Elizabeth
approaches
passes
Buckingham Palace for the last time. On this fine September day, with touches of blue in the sky, the London skyline looking glorious in the background. And here we have what is, for the late Queen, her last glimpse of that famous balcony where she appeared on so many occasions, where she stood with her father and mother, the King and Queen, at the end of the Second World War, cheered on by the vast crowds who were in the area we can see today. And the vast crowds again here when the young Queen was crowned back in 1953. Just ahead of the naval ratings were drawing the carriage. A very poignant moment for them because members of the Queen's household, including her private secretary, part of this procession now passing Buckingham Palace, their place of work, of course, along with Windsor and other royal residences, but Buckingham Palace was always the office. And here we have the staff of the palace. Great line of them standing in silence and respect as they wait for this procession to pass with the late Queen. And we think here of the four memorable jubilees during the reign. We look at that balcony and all the delight and joy and celebration of those times. Memories, of course, shared by the royal family and all of the royal household in today's procession, and millions watching wherever they're watching around the world. We'll remember those occasions with equal joy. procession. I mentioned the royal bodyguards and the bearer party. Also there are the service equerries who have been part of the Queen's service.
Cortege passes to Constitution Hill, worth taking a few moments with Bill to look ahead to the conclusion of this part of the procession and the handover of Her late Majesty's coffin to the State House.
Yes,
Leaving
the Royal
Buckingham
Navy
Palace
gun
behind.
crew will take the coffin through Wellington Arch, and as the commander
Slowly
of the gun
advancing
crew,
towards
Captain Catherine
Hyde Park
Jordan,
Corner,
commander of HMS Collingwood,
that transfer
goes through the arch.
in
The
readiness for
piping
the
party
journey
based
to
at the
Windsor,
side of the
the
arch
journey by
will
road.
pipe the still, which brings
Contrast to the
whole
events of
parade, those
70
attending
years
the
ago,
lead bit of the parade that is
George
at
VI
Hyde Park Corner
was taken
to quiet
procession
in order, and then
from
the
Westminster
ceremony
Hall
will take
to
place, and as the
Paddington
bearer
Station, there
party
was no
lift the
service
coffin,
at Westminster
it
Abbey.
will then be
The service
the side,
in full was
which
at
is the
St.
salute
George's Chapel,
part
Windsor.
of the three calls that the
King
piping
George
party will do. And that will be the
journey
moment of
from
transfer.
London to
These are
Windsor
not
by train.
bagpipes, these are the bosun's
Royal
pipe
train.
that used in action in the past in the Royal Navy because it would cut
Arrangements
through
this
the
time are
noise of
different.
battle. So you'll hear it
The
quite
decision was
distinctly.
made to
The first is a
take
long
the
8
Queen
seconds
from London to Windsor by road.
call, the
in
second
the State House.
low, high, then low.
Procession passing just on the left there, the great gardens of Buckingham Palace, where so many of those garden parties took place over the years, thousands of them. With so many people being delighted to be asked, just once in most cases, to enjoy the gardens, and indeed, if they were fortunate, to have a few words with Her Majesty during the garden party itself. And then on the other side we have Green Park. Members of Her Majesty's household taking their part proudly in the procession. And still the sound of Big Ben tolling right across central London, punctuated with the sounds of the King's Troop or House Artillery firing their long gun salute. And they've been based principally at Hyde Park for this firing today during this procession. at Hyde Park. There are 2 guns also being fired at Hyde Park Corner, dismounted guns, as part of this last formal section of this procession today in London, before a separate procession takes place at Windsor later on. Lining the route in this spot, Royal Air Force. Vice Chamberlain and the Treasurer of the Royal Household, part of this group representing those who served Her Majesty. Scene that will touch the hearts of everyone watching, I'm sure, as we look at the close family, children of the late Queen, led by the King, grandchildren, as they know full well that within minutes it will be the moment for the late Queen to leave London and to head back home to Windsor. London, of course, the city of the Queen's birth. And we are just a matter of a few yards away here from the Queen's childhood home on Piccadilly. And not too far either from her birthplace in Mayfair. view of Wellington Arch, of the greenery in this busy part of London. And all the armed forces formed up for this final ceremony. Carriage will be taken under the arch, and from there the transfer to the state hearse will take place. So many elements of strong tradition worked into the procession today. The piping party from the Royal Navy will pipe the still when the transfer is about to happen from the gun carriage to the hearse. Piping party that we heard at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral last year. A very strong echo of the Duke of Edinburgh's life at sea. And of course, from the Queen's point of view, a tribute to her late father, King George VI, and his experience during the First World War at the Battle of Jutland. So, very challenging experience at sea. And of course the Duke of Edinburgh himself with his wartime service in the Second World War. State crown and the orb and sceptre will be part of the procession, and that royal standard which is draped over the Queen's coffin all the way to Windsor until that final committal takes place in St. George's Chapel. And then those emblems of Her Majesty's authority will be set on the altar at St. George's Chapel before the committal takes place. Under the arch they go. Her Majesty's coffin on that carriage to be sheltered under that arch. The transfer will take place. Moments that few of us will ever forget, I'm sure. National anthem played as Her late Majesty was taken from Wellington Arch and is now on the way to Windsor after a very moving service at the Abbey and some clearly expressed messages, including those of the Archbishop of Canterbury, about the Queen's life of service and dedication, sense of duty, and then the magnificent, solemn, moving procession all the way from the Abbey to Wellington Arch. And there are crowds on the streets here approaching Knightsbridge, lots of them offering floral tributes, others just maintaining a dignified silence. And to see their Queen for the last time as she leaves London. Katie Nicholl and Robert Hardman are still with me here in the studio looking at these scenes and have been watching the procession and the service before that. Katie, as we see the Queen's final departure from the capital, I suspect that these are the images that will stay with people for many years to come.
I don't think anyone that watched that, Hugh, will ever forget it. And you said during your commentary, so many memories, and that's what struck me as I watched that procession past those landmarks that have punctuated the Queen's life and punctuated ours, because we look forward to Trooping the Colour and those birthday parades. You know, I look at my life and it's been marked by the silver, the diamond, the gold, all these wonderful jubilees, and I can't help but think back to the Platinum Jubilee celebrations and the last time the Queen stepped out on that balcony. And I think if anyone's wondering, what must she make of all of this? Remember when she stepped out for the last time, overwhelmed with emotion, that sea of faces, that sea of people there for her. Well, today they turned out again to bid a final farewell.
They did, Robert, and the sense of love and respect and admiration is just as strong as the sense of loss.
It is, Hugh. I thought it was rather touching. We saw just a few moments ago almost a ghost of a smile on the face of the King as he saw the end of this extraordinary ceremony, because it's been a spectacular and as we said earlier, unprecedented gathering of not just world leaders, but all these armed forces from around the world. This is a ceremony unlike anything, really, as you said earlier, since the funeral of George VI, possibly since the coronation. And it's all gone exactly as the Queen would have wanted. She paid a great deal of attention to all of this.
Well, there are so many things we could say after that service of solemn beauty
and I think the wonderful contrast between the solemnity and the formalities we had a little earlier, and now just look at the capital
slow
coming
way
out. I mean, they are
up to Wellington
20,
Arch.
30, 40, 50 deep in places.
Now, as you can see and hear, people cheering, clapping, throwing flowers.
This is the sort of
the Queen's
on her
coffin
way to
makes its way here through Hyde Park,
which will be, I think, rather
on the way to Windsor,
Last night,
followed directly behind by her son, the
glorious
King,
rainbow
and Princess Royal.
over London when we were preparing for today. And today it's a sunny day in September, and crowds really have come out in their many thousands. And the sunshine has added to the sense of colour and vibrancy. Solid but not gloomy. This is the issue, because, as so many people have said, a life of 96 years is something to be celebrated. Of course, the funeral will be missed, but people understand that there's a lot here that needs to be said about everything that was achieved over that long lifetime. And that's really why I think that people have wanted to come out. It's a mark of thanks as well, not just of admiration. It's saying thank you as well as farewell.
It is, Hugh, and I suspect had it been pouring with rain, everyone that's standing out there today would still have done it in all weather.
It would be very British.
It would be terribly British, but I think the fact that as the coffin left the Abbey and the clouds parted and the sun came down, it was a wonderful moment to see that spectacle bathed in sunshine, and those rainbows that you point out, I think, struck so many people. The double rainbow over Buckingham Palace, the rainbow over Windsor Castle. I think we'll all be looking out for a rainbow later on today.
Indeed we will. And as you were saying, Robert, we're reflecting on what's gone on today.
We will keep,
of course, we're
for much
also
of the time with those
ahead
scenes
to
as
the
the
final
cortege
part
makes
of
its way
this
to Windsor. But I'm joined here in the studio, I'm very pleased to say, by Jonathan Dimbleby, King
these
Charles's
people are
biographer
clearly
and now
out to say
a historian and broadcaster, of course,
goodbye.
Julia Samuel, the
Thank you
grief
for all you've
counsellor,
done.
They are, and
also an
we
author,
see Her Late
and Professor
Majesty
Anna Whitelock,
coming
you perhaps
past
will
with
have
the
seen earlier,
memorial
one
to
of the
Prince
noted
Albert,
royal
that
historians.
extraordinary
Julia,
memorial, 150 years old.
can I begin with you? Now, it probably ought to say that you're Prince George's godmother. We don't want to intrude in a private relationship today, but you do counsel a lot of people about grief and funeral. And there we saw, I think a lot of people would say, from their own experience, that kind of moment when it's all totally final, the coffin is there, it is the end, is terribly hard for people. And we saw all the generations there. We saw the grief on her children's face and her grandchildren's face. Of course, Prince George, one might say, it was him coming face to face with his destiny. Just overall, what was your reflection on everything you saw in the Abbey?
Today, and there is
My
21st
feeling
century
was
Britain.
that it's the beauty
saluting
of the
really
service
one of the greats.
and the sort of divinity of it in some way
It's a wonderful
held
parallel, isn't it,
the
to
great
be
pain of the loss.
passing the Royal
And
Albert
that
Hall? Because, of course,
Part of grieving is
all those
facing the
years that
reality
the
of the loss. And the
was
service
determined to
enables us
attend
to
the
do that.
Festival of
that
Remembrance
the things
on
that we
Remembrance
do to
weekend,
block the pain of it
eve
are
of
often
the
things that do us
Remembrance
harm over
service at the
time.
Cenotaph.
So having the support of being
The
together,
bus among
being
5,000
surrounded by
people
family,
in that
by
hall
beautiful music,
when
by the
she
procession,
arrived at just
contains,
before
I
7
think, a lot
o'clock
of the
on Saturday
overwhelming
evening
feelings,
was remarkable.
while feeling
with
some of the
people
pain. I think people will feel
really
many different feelings at the
feeling
same
that
time. Often you
the
get
Queen's
confused, you
authority
feel sad, you
and the
feel
Queen's
a lot
blessing
of
on what
pain,
was
but you
happening
also
was
feel
indispensable.
happy and
It wasn't the same
grateful,
event.
and I think we need
And
to be
isn't the
allowed to
same
feel
event,
all of
won't
those
be the
feelings
same
at
event
once.
Without, although of
And
course
all the
the
while
King will
encircled by
already
family
has
at the heart
impressed
of
lots
it.
of people with the way
Yeah.
that he's
All is very
Everyone wanted an imprimatur on
The ceremony
set.
itself,
And
too,
wasn't it wonderful the way the procession
lends
took
it
in
a
almost
pace
every
for
single
reflection.
through, not
You
just the cenotaph
to
and the
have
women
that
of war,
pace
but up to
in
Hyde
order
Park Corner. There's the New
to let the
Zealand War
feelings
Memorial, the
go
Australian
through
War
us,
Memorial.
and
I mean,
as they go
every
through us,
aspect
we incrementally
of shared
adjust
sacrifice,
this
I
new
think, has
reality
been
that we didn't
recognised
want
today
and we didn't
through
choose, that this person
exemplary
has died.
procession.
And that is
I
the
was really
grieving
struck
process, is
as
coming
well,
to
Katie, by
terms
the way in
with
which
that reality.
the procession
And if-
10
alive
days for
and the way
him,
that
as
she
we've
lived
discussed
her life.
many times.
I think you're absolutely right.
I mean, the grief, I
We saw
thought,
the
was
face
very,
reflected in
very
that
clearly
service
etched
with some of
deep
her
in his
favourite
face.
hymns.
Yes.
One might
Readings
say
that
it's
date back to the
terribly difficult to have to
coronation.
do
There was
all that in public.
everything had been
On the
so
other hand, one
carefully
might say,
considered and
is there
thought
some
out
solace in
and
seeing the
punctuated
great
with the
love? I
most
mean,
important
how do you
things
think he will have
in
got
her
through
life,
today?
Her faith,
My
the armed
suspicion is that
forces,
there's great
her
solace
family,
in
her
it.
people.
The
It's
dignity,
all there.
the
And
majesty
I think
of
also
the
that
occasion,
sense
the extraordinary
yes, we have lost
complexity
something very, very
woven
special.
together to
To all of
create
us,
a
this is a
ceremony
testimony to that.
which none of us
But
have
in all of
seen
this,
in our
as Robert says,
lifetimes
the
on that
tradition,
scale and are very
histories and
unlikely to
landmarks,
see
everything
again.
that's wrapped into this
Acts
is the promise
for
of the
him,
new,
I
the
suspect, I only
continuity.
suspect this,
And
as a
we've
great
seen that in
strength,
the
a
past 11 days,
reinforcement, a
extraordinary days,
feeling
and
that
how the
he
new
is
king has been
part of
welcomed.
something. I
But
was
we saw that
watching
in the
with a great
with Prince George and Princess
combination
Charlotte,
of
that promise
competing
the future,
emotions,
that
a
promise
great deal of
what's
sorrow
next
to what you
to
witness,
come.
and also a
And I
sort of
think that's
wonder that the
reassuring,
state can do these things.
particularly at the
And I was, some lines came into my mind from T.S. Eliot.
Of some of
Time
the
present
extraordinary
and time
changes
future.
that the
time
late
past
Queen
and time
made
present
during
are
her reign.
perhaps
I mean, it was only
contained in
2011
time
she
future.
changed hundreds,
future,
thousands of
perhaps
years
in
of male
time
primogenic
past.
cells, so
And
that,
it
you know,
has
the
that
line
sense of
succession
ceremony,
has changed. All these
permanence, continuity.
I mean, when
Whether
historians
that
look
is
back on this
realistic or
reign,
not,
they've
of
seen
course,
so
is a
many
very big
small
question. But
ways
I
in which
think that
very
is how he
quietly,
will
but very
feel it, because
firmly,
he is
completely
steeped
transformed
in the
this
Constitution.
And
He's
I also love the
steeped
way
in
that
the
the
monarchy,
procession,
and
it
he's
wasn't-
steeped
it
in
wasn't
his
just about
role,
recognising her,
and
I mean,
he is playing his
it
role, and
was,
I
but
think
in
there's a
her way,
comfort in
when she
doing
organised
that.
it, she wanted
Julia
to
spoke
recognise
so
others. I
eloquently
thought the
about
way in which
grief
she
and
placed
loss
the
and
Victoria
sorrow.
Cross and the
We
George
saw
Cross
that
thing
in
was
the
right at
in the
the front
crowd.
of that-
I was
that procession,
when
for
the
example. That was so
cortege
her,
came
you know, the George
away
Cross,
from the
the
abbey
great
on the
decoration
gun
invented
carriage,
by
the
her
crowd was
father at the height of the
absolutely
war.
silent.
All these little things. There's a
When
lot of nods,
it was
I think,
in
to
the
her parents.
in the hearse
Commonwealth,
leaving
yeah.
Wellington
Mounties, I mean,
Arch
it was
to
all
come
there, down
to
to
Windsor,
the NHS
people
workers
started
and
to clap
everyone
again.
that helped us through
And
the
I
pandemic.
think there is a great
recipients of
range
the
of
George
emotions
Cross, of
going
course,
on
the
in those
NHS.
people who care about these things.
Last
And
word
it is
then from us
also
before
a
we go
question
to
of
our colleagues.
moments of communication.
next,
It was very moving,
phase
wasn't
of
it, to
the
see the
day.
little notes
and Katie,
written
you
by
first of all,
King Charles atop the beautiful
it's impossible to
wreath
start
in loving, devoted memory
really
of
assessing
Charles.
I saw the writing,
neatly, incredibly,
obviously knew it was
this
like for him, and I saw that
remarkable reign so early
familiar
on.
writing.
Distinguished
And
authors,
there
both,
are other things that I
it's a
think
challenge to
he,
do
when he
something
perhaps looks
like
back,
that.
sees it, which he won't.
Do you feel that
the
today will have helped
astonishing
people
images that we've
maybe
seen,
turn the page to
quite extraordinarily
just
beautiful
realise
inside
that
the abbey itself.
great change is
a
happening
service which
and that they can take that
not
on
everyone
board?
will
Is today
share
the
the
day
belief
when
that
people will
underpinned
be
the service,
helped
or
in
that
that
underpinned
direction?
her
I
own
think
deep
so. I
conviction,
think
as the
this is the moment
Archbishop
that
said.
completes
But a lot of
11
people will be deeply
extraordinary
moved by that
days,
service.
and,
I was afterwards
you could
struck,
plan and-
obviously, by
and
the
rehearse
children, as
and dress
Julia
rehearse and do it
touched
all over
on,
again.
the
You couldn't
grandchildren.
predict
But
how
then there was an
public were going to
image
respond,
as
what
the
mood would
cortege
be.
came away from the Abbey
It's been
into
phenomenal,
Parliament
but this
Square,
is closure
an
today,
image of
and I
Churchill,
think back to what
and we
Queen
looked
said in
down
her very
on the
first
coffin
broadcast
from
when she rang the
Churchill's
bell
perspective,
during
and it
the
made me think,
all will be
so
well,
long ago,
because it will.
the Queen
Robert,
revered
is today the day
Churchill. She had
when that happens?
thought he
Because
was the most
it's been
wonderful
10
man.
days
He
of people
revered
really
her, and
trying
it was
to come to terms
extraordinary
with
coming together.
such a
of
momentous change in
70 years ago
public
and
life and
today.
personal lives.
It was very
I think what we've
moving,
seen today,
powerful
we have
occasion.
seen the
I think we could be
embodiment
talking
of
about the
greatness
images
from
we
the-
saw in that
the-
abbey for at
the
least the
world
next
leaders
25
gathered to what we're
hours on
seeing
every
now,
single
an entire
range of
nation
Charlotte's
coming out.
feet that
This
didn't quite
is
reach the fore there to
greatness
support
in
her
our
brother.
time, and that
you know,
greatness is really
some of the stuff we've talked
down
about,
to
but there really
this
is.
extraordinary
Anna,
moment
can I
her
just
life
ask you to
shaped
put it
by
in a
three
bit of
people in
historical
particular, her
context? I
father,
found,
her
like, you know, we've
darling
talked a
father,
little
her
bit
beloved mother, and
before
of course, her
about
beloved Philip.
how
And I just think it
this
is
emphasis on the
so
ceremonial
powerful
is
that
somewhat
here she
a
is,
modern
she's
thing
on
if
her
you think
way,
about the
and after all
1,000
this grandeur
years
and
of the
greatness,
monarchy.
tonight
I found
she'll be
myself as I was watching
reunited
it thinking,
with
if we'd been at such an occasion 300 years
Well,
ago, or
we are
500 years ago, or
looking at
700
the
years ago, would we have seen anything similar, or is this
progress
really
of the
truly something the modern
procession of
monarchy
the
has
state
mastered?
I think it's the braiding
to
together of the
Windsor,
public
the royal town of
ceremonial
Windsor,
with the emotional,
where the final
with
committal
the
will
familial.
take place
We talked
a
before, I
little later this
mentioned
afternoon, and
Walter
our
Badger,
coverage
the constitutional
continues.
observer, and he said it was
We will be
important to make
following the journey,
monarchy
Queen's last journey out of
intelligible,
London,
for people
to
to
her home
understand
at
it, and the way
Windsor
to
Castle.
do that was through this
And then
connection
we'll be
with
following the
family,
new
through
procession that'll take
ceremony,
place at Windsor,
yes, but also
and of course
through
the service
this emotional
at St.
bond that people
George's
had
Chapel.
to this
And as
family
we
and to
look
obviously
at
to the Queen. And
vehicles making
I
their
mean,
way,
watching,
and the
for
staters
me,
in
I found it,
particular,
you know,
and see the
I
bright
should
colours
be
of the Royal
understanding it
Standard,
from a kind of intellectual
the
perspective
crown
as
and
a
the orb and
professor
sceptre,
of the history of modern
telling
monarchy, but I
everyone
found
along
it
the
sort
way
of
that this is
bewildering, not
Her
quite
Majesty,
able
Queen
to process
Elizabeth
the fact that,
II,
you know,
a
that this
Christian
woman
of conviction,
had this kind of
more than
magnetic
anyone understood
quality
the
that's drawn
message of the
together
preacher,
heads of
which
state
is
from
that there is a
across the
time
world,
and season
a monarchy
to all
that is
things,
so
a time to
outdated
be
in many
born
ways, but
and a
still
time
somehow her
to
life
die.
had a
Queen
relevance.
understood
And I
that
think that
as part
the
of
very
the
sort of
natural
pointed
rhythm of
address
life
from
and
the Archbishop of
natural
Canterbury
transition
talking about
of the great
the example of her
constitution
loving
that
service
she's
very
upheld
pointed to the world
over
leaders
many,
that were
many
gathered, I think, that showed that somehow
She's
there's
returning
a
home to
relevance
Windsor.
to her, even
Let's
in,
join
exemplifying
Kirsty.
and the epitome of this age-old institution.
Yes, and pause there for a moment and take in these images,
ceremonial tableau of that
just to
magnificent
outline
state
the routes
occasion
that the cortege is
gently
taking
recedes into the background
now on
as
the,
the Queen's coffin
Talgarth Road,
makes
the great
its way now
A4 that leads
through
out
London
of the centre of
and out
London.
towards Windsor.
They've passed through Knightsbridge, and now they're on
Welcome
their
to
way
the splendour of Windsor
towards
Castle, the near
edges of
1,000-year-old
the
home of
capital,
royalty and the
State
backdrop
House
to
designed
many great battles and grand banquets.
by
But today,
Her Majesty at her
sees maybe
request, so that she
its most momentous
was
event,
still
the burial
visible
of our
on
longest
this, the
reigning
final
monarch,
journey.
Queen
Let's
Elizabeth
take
II.
in some of the images.
The Queen will this afternoon finally be laid to rest in St George's Chapel alongside her beloved parents, sister and husband. So many days of grand public ceremony will come to an intimate ending as Her Majesty passes into history. We'll see the Queen's coffin making its journey towards Windsor and the committal service, which will be attended by the King, the rest of the royal family, and also Her Majesty's closest friends. Windsor Castle is certainly exquisitely grand and imposing, but it's also a place where the Queen, well then of course a little princess, played as a toddler on the lawn, found safety as a teenager during the Blitz, rode her ponies, nursed her children, walked her dogs. Having left her cherished home in the Scottish Highlands 11 days ago, today she will come to rest for eternity in the home that was so important it gave name to her family. Well, the town of Windsor is, of course, a major tourist destination. It's used to crowds, but today its streets have taken on a unique character. The grounds of the chapel and the edges of the Long Walk are carpeted with bouquets of flowers. And the thousands of visitors, some local and many more from far-flung corners of the globe, are quietly positioning themselves to take one last look at Her Majesty's coffin. David Dimbleby will be taking us through this afternoon's event.
I suppose the way to see this afternoon's service is that if what happened at Westminster Abbey was the grandeur of a state funeral with heads of state, with people from all over the world coming to pay tribute to Her late Majesty, what is going to happen here at Windsor this afternoon
into West London
is much
Emily
closer
Morgan is
to
by the roadside
a
with the
family
crowds
funeral.
who are waiting
And as Kirsty
for
was
a
saying,
glimpse
the Queen is going to
of the
be
Queen's coffin as it passes.
interred here.
Emily,
along
clearly
with the
people
Queen
will have
Mother,
been waiting for a very long time at this
Duke
point.
of Edinburgh, Princess Margaret.
They have been
And
waiting a
will
very
lie
long time, and as you can imagine,
10 other
the mood here is
sovereigns
very
going way
solemn,
back
it's
to
very
Henry VI in
reflective. I'm standing, as you say,
1471.
on the A4.
So
it is
in
one of the
that
main
sense
routes out of London,
the
usually
sovereign coming back
extremely
to the
busy,
place where
6
our
lanes
sovereigns,
of traffic, but this
many of our
morning at 10
sovereigns
a.m.
lie.
this
But on the other
road
hand,
fell
the
silent.
congregation
It was
is going
at
to
that
be
point that a steady
very different
stream
here.
of people began to gather. You
People
can see now,
sitting here now,
packed
perfectly
along the
obvious, we're not
side
in
of
Westminster
this
Abbey, they've
road.
assembled here,
Thousands
and they
of people
are
now waiting
a different
to
kind of
witness
congregation,
the state
much
hearse
smaller.
come through carrying the coffin of
They
Queen
include,
Elizabeth
for
II.
instance,
There
many
are
of the
6 or
Queen's
7
godchildren.
rows of
They
people
include
packed along here,
large
many
numbers
of them
people who
holding
worked
flowers,
on the Queen's
floral tributes,
estates,
which they say they
whether
will
in
then
Scotland
throw on
or
the
in
hearse.
Norfolk
There
or
are
London.
young and old here.
Some of them
Lots of
wearing,
people
you
have
see
come
that
out with their
little
families. You can
medal,
see many
the
children
Royal
here
Victorian
wanting
Order,
to experience this
which several
moment. The
people here are
atmosphere,
wearing, and
as I
that's the
said,
order
is
that's a
sombre,
personal
but there
gift of
have
the
been
Queen, only
moments
given
of
to people
laughter,
who
of joking.
have
The
worked for
conversations
her,
I have
and
heard
it's
are
her
of
decision
people
whether they should
sharing
have it.
their moments, reflecting on the last 70
we'll see here
years
is a
of the
quite
reign of Queen
different
Elizabeth II.
service.
There's a real community
with
spirit here. Most
this
people I've spoken to are local.
momentous
They live
ending to
very
it,
locally. They've come
which
out having
Hugh was
watched the
talking
state
about earlier
funeral
on.
on their television.
The
They are
moment
now
when
reflecting
the
on those
instruments of
70
monarchy
years.
that
As
were
I say, there's a
presented to
community
her
spirit here. They
in
are
Westminster Abbey
connected by
at the
grief, but
coronation
also they are bonding
are
in this
removed from the top of the
monumental
coffin and
moment that
returned
they
to
are
those
about
3
to
cushions you can
witness.
just
Of
see in
course,
the far
most people
distance
here will have never
on the altar
witnessed or experienced
George's
anything
Chapel.
like this before. But of course, in Brentford, they are used to royal processions.
The
Nearly
banners,
700 years ago, King
of course,
Henry
here
VIII's
are
coffin
of the
passed
Royal
through
Order
here
of the Garter,
and spent the
hanging
night at Sion House, which is less than a
splendidly
mile
all the
from
way
here.
down.
It spent the house there,
The Garter
then
Knights,
went
who
on to St
each have to
George's
provide
Chapel
the banner.
in
There are
Windsor,
24
which
of
is
them in
where
all,
the
and
Queen
members of the royal
will
family
head
as well.
later today
So this
in
chapel
the
not
state
only serves the
hearse.
purpose of being the chapel
Now,
of
of course,
Windsor,
back then,
but
many
also
people
of
would
the
have come out
Order of the Garter,
to say their last goodbyes
founded in
as well.
1348
Here, people are doing
by
exactly the
Edward
same
III. So
today
history
to
here,
be
just
part
as in
of that moment in
Westminster
history. And I
Abbey,
think we are
history
just
here is
moments
present for
away
this
before the
momentous
hearse
afternoon.
comes past and people can say their goodbyes.
Emily, thank you.
Well, I'm joined now in our studio by the very well-known face, the gardener and broadcaster, Alan Titchmarsh. Thank you very much for taking the time, especially since this is a personal day for you too, because you knew the Queen, you met her on very many occasions. What are your thoughts today as you've watched, as we've all watched, almost spellbound by some of those images?
I've been so moved, Kirsty, by the fact that we've all come together, as she said we would, and we must. And there's been this enormous sense of togetherness created for us by our late Majesty, the Queen. And the fact that the streets were so lined, that Westminster Abbey was full of the great and the good, but we were there too, in spirit and many thousands in person. And she has pulled us all together over the years, and I felt also an enormous sense of continuity. We all thought, oh my goodness me, what will happen when the Queen goes? The Queen has gone, and yet we're still here. She would have wanted us to be. We now have a king who has taken up the reins seamlessly, spoken beautifully, right the way through. And I feel safe. I feel as though we've all come together to say we're all right, you know, it will be okay. She gave us 70 years on the throne. We've learned from her. We will not disappoint her. We will carry on, we will be positive, and we will remember her with enormous fondness and respect.
I was wondering what you were making of, to me, although of course a state occasion, and indeed there will never be a grander one than that, but I was looking at the wreath on the coffin, so full of colour. I saw rosemaries, hydrangeas, there were dahlias, oak leaves. It seemed to me it was a very, very personal touch, and I just wondered, you, with your gardener's eye, what you think about that?
Our history was in that wreath. There were oak leaves there were oak trees in Windsor Great Park that were growing here and were mature when William the Conqueror invaded in 1066. Some of them are still there, still alive. And it's Hearts of Oak, isn't it, that famous military song? Oak leaves, rosemary, as you say, for remembrance, English roses. And the Prince of Wales, as you know, as I know, is a great gardener. And it was his wreath there, his message on there to his mother, who was
West
also
London now,
a keener gardener than most people
gathering all along the route.
I didn't know that. I didn't know
she loved small flowers. Lily of the Valley was her favourite flower. She loved primroses. The sort of humble
gather
flowers,
at a moment like this, to line the route. I mean, goodness, the Metropolitan Police and the military are guarding every step of it,
and it was a great reminder that the lasting great legacy from the Queen was the Queen's green canopy.
I think the impulse
that carries on.
Their
It is a small
with the Queen
consolation
that
to me that the first words my sovereign ever spoke to me in 1985 at the Chelsea Flower
and also
Show,
something about
when I did a
making
cottage
meaning
garden.
and
She
being
said to me,
together to
first time she'd
witness
ever
this,
spoken, ever met her, she said, your onions are
very
small.
connecting that there's something bigger
She
than
must have seen I was
themselves.
crestfallen.
And
She went
it
on to
feels like
say,
there's been longing for an outpouring to come together for years that has
What about
been
what
released
she gave you your MBE
through the devastation in
and
some
people
way
always say,
of the
well,
Queen's
don't really
death.
talk about what she
It
said.
was
Maybe
notable
now,
in
maybe
a
today is
sermon
the day to
that
talk
was
about
given
what
by
she
the
said. What was
Archbishop
the
of
conversation?
Canterbury.
Well,
He
I'd have to
referred
graduate.
to
It was
that
2000. It was the millennium, New Year.
historic now, memorable speech that the Queen made from here at Windsor when she was in her COVID bubble, "We will meet again." He based a thread of his sermon on that. This point of bringing people together is embodied in what we're
we're awfully
witnessing.
close, aren't we? And so she took over the table, the trestle table, and she said, yes, you pull up. And then we had a lovely time. You know, when you can make the Queen laugh, when you can make the Queen laugh, she threw her head back. It was genuine laughter. And the smile that we all know. And then when I came to
leaving London, that she will never come to London again. And there's a sort of shock that we have of that. But also, our relationship with her and our love for her has not died. This idea that the love will continue well after she's buried. The relationship with the person that we love continues because the love for that person never dies. And it's this dual task of feeling the pain of loss and facing the reality whilst also loving and continuing them. And we will meet again gives you the underlying spirit of hope. And hope is the alchemy that turns the life around. Hope is how you manage with the love and connection of others, sometimes unbearable.
Well, she wasn't wrong.
Just to add to that,
extraordinarily,
untold
you saw as he was then,
hundreds of billions are watching this around the world.
He was about to come,
there have been 100 heads of states, royalty, representative governments here. Some of those governments have been in a very, are in a very fractious relationship with this this country for one reason or another. Their representatives have come here on behalf of their people in part to pay homage to the Queen, because there is that feeling, that link between millions of people elsewhere. And the European Union is in conflict. Ursula von der Leyen said, I thought most potently, that the Queen spoke the soul of the world.
And after dinner, just on that point, and we saw that juxtaposition very clearly in Westminster Abbey. And, you know, for some people that will have been uncomfortable, seeing the Chinese Vice President walk in. We should be candid about that. And we talk about the soft power of the monarchy and the Queen. But that's not to say it wasn't considerable power. And I guess one of the questions is, how much was that the Queen and how much is that the monarchy?
It's such an important question, because if it was only the Queen, then that soft power evaporates. If it is the institution that she represented and survives, then it's very significant. My instinct is that over time, there's always been succession, always been uncertainty. Our own power as a nation has diminished, of course, in the world. But our influence, I think, is sustained in part by that soft power which is represented